Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English story. Sitting in a small cafe, Ethan sipped his coffee and smiled at the young man across from him. The boy, fresh out of college, had just asked him, "How did you do it? How did you reach where you are today?" Ethan leaned back, his gaze drifting to the window, where the city skyline glimmered in the late afternoon sun. He took a deep breath and began, "It wasn't always like this. Let me tell you a story about me. The dreamer in a small town. I grew up in a tiny town." Ethan started, his voice calm and reflective. The kind of place where everyone knows your name and expects you to live the same life they do. My dad ran a garage, and it was pretty much understood that I'd take over one day. But as a kid, I'd sit on this hill overlooking the town and imagine more. I'd close my eyes and picture skyscrapers, bustling streets, and a life that felt limitless. For years, I kept those dreams to myself. Who was I to think I could have any of that? He paused, chuckling softly. I mean, I wasn't special. I wasn't the smartest kid or the most talented. But that dream, it never left me. The first step, one night, I stumbled across a video of someone climbing a mountain. The guy said, "The higher you climb, the better the view. But the climb isn't easy. You'll slip, you'll fall. But it's worth it." I couldn't stop thinking about it. That was my wake-up call. I decided to pursue architecture. It felt crazy at the time. I had no money for college, no background in art or design, nothing. But I signed up for an online course. It was a mess at first. My first project? A model of a bridge that looked more like a broken ruler. He laughed. Everyone around me thought I was wasting my time. But there was this one professor, Mr. Unn, who told me, "Ethan, every skyscraper starts with one brick. Just focus on that brick." Those words carried me through. The climb gets steeper. Ethan's voice grew quieter, more serious. It wasn't smooth sailing, though. I worked long hours at the garage to pay for my classes. Sometimes I'd be so tired I'd fall asleep with my sketches still in my hands. There were moments I wanted to quit. A competition I entered ended in failure, and I overheard someone say, "He's too old to start something new." It stung bad. But then I'd hear Mr. Allen's voice in my head. "Focus on the next brick." Breaking through. After years of grinding, I finally got certified. Then came the big leap. I applied for an internship at a major firm in the city. When they accepted me, I couldn't believe it. Moving to the city was terrifying. I was this small town guy trying to fit into a world of towering buildings and ambitious people. But I worked hard. I stayed late, took on projects no one wanted, and poured my heart into every design. One day, my boss gave me a shot. He asked me to pitch an idea for a community center. I put everything into it, and when it got approved, I felt something shift. For the first time, I thought, I belong here. Reaching the summit, Ethan gestured toward the skyline outside the window. Now, years later, I've worked on some of those skyscrapers you see out there. But you know what I'm most proud of? He leaned in, his eyes warm with emotion. It's not the tall buildings. It's the library I designed back in my hometown. It's small, nothing fancy, but it became a place where kids like me can dream big. That's the real reward, not just climbing the heights, but lifting others up along the way. His final words, Ethan smiled, finishing his coffee. "Listen, I'm no different from you. The only thing I did was take that first step, even when I was scared. I kept climbing, brick by brick. So, If you're asking how, Ethan leaned forward, resting his arms on the table as the young man across from him scribbled notes furiously. You want to know more? He asked with a small smile. All right, let me tell you about the turning points. These moments weren't grand. They were small decisions that changed everything. Facing fear. There was this one day, Ethan began, his tone more serious, when I thought about giving up for real. I had just moved to the city, and the pressure was crushing me. I felt out of place. Everyone seemed so polished, so confident, and there I was, a small town guy fumbling through designs that were always almost good enough. One night, I stayed late at the office working on a project. My supervisor, a tough but fair woman named Lisa, came by. She looked at my work and said, Ethan, this isn't bad, but you're holding back. Why? I didn't know what to say. I finally blurted out, I'm scared it won't be good enough. And do you know what she told me? Ethan leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Good enough isn't your goal. Your goal is to give it your all, even if it scares you. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized I had been letting fear dictate my actions. That night, I decided to stop playing it safe. From then on, I took risks with my designs, and you know what? Some of them flopped, but others, they stood out. Building confidence, Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You know, confidence doesn't just appear one day. It's built, little by little. There was a time when I dreaded speaking up in meetings. I thought, what if I say something stupid? One day, I forced myself to pitch an idea during a team meeting. My hands were shaking, my voice wavered, but I did it. The feedback wasn't glowing, but it wasn't terrible either, and that was enough to keep me trying. Over time, I started to trust myself. I learned that confidence isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, flaws and all. The more I pushed myself, the more I realized I had something to offer. The power of persistence. Ethan's expression softened as he looked at the young man. Here's the thing no one tells you. Success isn't about giant leaps. It's about persistence, tiny steps, day after day. There were times when I doubted everything. I'd think, why am I even doing this? What if I fail? But then I'd remember something my dad used to say when I worked in his garage. Fix one thing at a time, and soon the whole engine will run. That advice carried me through the toughest days. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I focused on the next step. Just one more sketch, one more draft, one more meeting. And before I knew it, I was moving forward, helping others along the way. Ethan leaned back, his voice growing softer. You know, the most rewarding part of my journey wasn't reaching the top. It was realizing I could help others climb. 2. After a few years in the city, I got the chance to mentor younger designers. It reminded me of how Mr. Alan and Lisa believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Seeing those young designers grow, seeing their confidence build, that's when I truly felt like I'd made it. Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about what you inspire in others. That's the real legacy. A message to remember. Ethan looked directly at the young man, his gaze steady and encouraging. You're going to have doubts. You're going to stumble. But don't let that stop you. Start small. Take risks. Learn from your mistakes. And above all, Keep going. Because the view from the top, it's not just about what you see. It's about knowing you earned it every step of the way. The young man nodded, his eyes bright with determination. Ethan smiled, knowing that somewhere in the boy's heart, a seed had been planted. He stood, shook the boy's hand, and walked out of the cafe, leaving behind not just advice, but hope. Ethan adjusted his coat as he stepped outside the cafe. The crisp air nipped at his face, but his heart felt warm. Sharing his story always brought back a flood of memories, some painful, others triumphant. It reminded him how far he had come and how much further he still wanted to go. The unexpected roadblock. As Ethan walked down the bustling city street, he recalled one of the darkest chapters of his journey. "I don't think I mentioned this," he'd said earlier to the young man, "but there was a point where I almost lost everything." It was during his third year at the firm. He had just landed his first big solo project, a commercial building in the heart of the city. The opportunity was a dream come true, but it came with relentless pressure. Ethan poured every ounce of himself into the project, working long hours and ignoring his own well-being. Then came the setback. A miscalculation in the design led to a delay in the project's approval. The mistake wasn't entirely his fault, but as the lead designer, the responsibility fell on his shoulders. The criticism was brutal. His confidence took a massive hit. "I remember sitting in my apartment," Ethan recounted, "staring at the city lights and wondering if I was cut out for this. For the first time in years, I thought about quitting. But then, something shifted." Ethan picked up his phone and called Lisa, his mentor. He expected a lecture or disappointment. But instead, she told him, "Ethan, the mistake isn't the problem. It's how you respond to it. You've got two choices. Let it define you or let it refine you." Learning from failure. Ethan took those words to heart. He went back to the drawing board, revisited every detail of the project, and sought advice from colleagues. It wasn't easy facing the people who had criticized him, but their insights proved invaluable. When the project was finally approved months later, it wasn't just a win for the company, it was a personal victory. Ethan had turned a near failure into a testament to resilience. "That experience taught me something," he told the young man earlier. "Failure isn't the end. It's just a chapter, and you get to decide how the story continues." Rediscovering purpose. After that ordeal, Ethan began to see his work differently. "I stopped chasing perfection," he explained. "Instead, I focused on creating things that mattered to me, to the people around me, to the communities I was serving." One of his most meaningful projects came years later. It was a low-income housing development that prioritized sustainability and community spaces. Ethan poured his heart into it, drawing inspiration from his own modest upbringing. "When the first families moved in, I visited the site," Ethan recalled. "There was this little boy playing outside. He looked up at me and said, 'Is this your building?' When I nodded, he grinned and said, 'It feels like home.'" Ethan paused, his voice thick with emotion. That moment, that was my summit. That was worth every sleepless night, every stumble, every doubt. A legacy in progress. As Ethan continued down the street, he thought about the young man at the cafe. He hoped his words had sparked something in him, just as others had sparked something in Ethan all those years ago. Ethan's story wasn't finished. There were still mountains to climb, new heights to reach. But he knew now that the journey mattered more than the destination. His final reflection, standing at a crosswalk, Ethan looked up at the towering buildings surrounding him. He smiled, thinking, the higher I climb, the more I realize the greatest heights aren't the ones you reach, they're the ones you help others to see. And with that thought, Ethan crossed the street, ready to face whatever came next in his ever-unfolding journey. Ethan returned to his apartment later that evening, feeling both reflective and inspired. The conversation at the cafe had stirred up memories and emotions he hadn't visited in a long time. As he settled into his favorite armchair, his mind wandered to the lessons he had learned over the years, lessons that had shaped him, tested him, and ultimately defined his journey. The importance of letting go. Ethan recalled a moment not long after his first major success. Riding the high of his accomplishments, he had eagerly taken on multiple projects at once, wanting to prove to himself and others that he could handle it all. But the pressure quickly became overwhelming. I learned the hard way, he'd said to the young man earlier, that you can't carry everything at once. Sometimes, you have to let go of what doesn't serve you, even if it feels like you're giving up. One particular project, a high-profile, high-stakes skyscraper, had nearly cost him his health and sanity. Despite his best efforts, it became clear that he couldn't meet the unrealistic expectations placed on him. After much deliberation, he approached his boss and asked to step down from the lead role. It wasn't an easy decision. Ethan had wrestled with feelings of failure and inadequacy. But in the months that followed, he realized it was the right choice. Stepping back allowed him to focus on projects that aligned with his values, rekindle his passion for design, and prioritize his well-being. Letting go doesn't mean giving up, he'd explained earlier. It means making space for what truly matters. Redefining success. For years, Ethan had equated success with recognition, financial security, and accolades. But as he grew older, his perspective shifted. Success isn't about how many awards you win or how much money you make, he often told aspiring architects. It's about the impact you leave behind, the lives you touch, the communities you uplift. One project, in particular, embodied this philosophy. Ethan had worked on a public park in an underprivileged neighborhood, transforming an abandoned lot into a vibrant space for families and children. Seeing the park come to life, filled with laughter and joy, gave him a sense of fulfillment that no trophy ever could. That's when I realized, he'd said earlier, that the best designs aren't the ones that dazzle. They're the ones that make people feel seen, valued, and connected. Mentorship and giving back. Ethan had always been grateful for the mentors who had guided him. From his high school teacher who encouraged him to dream big to Lisa, who had pushed him to face his fears. Now, he made it a priority to pay it forward. He started volunteering at a local community college, teaching evening classes for aspiring designers who couldn't afford formal education. He also mentored interns at his firm, offering the same guidance and encouragement that had once kept him going. I see myself in them, he'd said earlier with a smile. The uncertainty, the hunger, the fear of failure, it's all there. But so is the potential. And if I can help them see that, even a little, then I've done my job. The value of reflection. As Ethan sat in his armchair, staring at the city lights outside his window, he thought about how far he had come. But more importantly, he thought about how much he had grown. Life isn't just about chasing heights, he murmured to himself. It's about understanding why you're climbing in the first place. Ethan had learned to embrace the quiet moments, the pauses between projects, the late night reflections, the conversations like the one he'd had earlier that day. These moments reminded him of his purpose, grounded him, and gave him clarity for the road ahead. A call to action. The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling renewed. He had an idea, a way to inspire others on a larger scale. Over breakfast, he drafted a proposal for a workshop series titled Chasing Heights. Building Your Path to Success. The workshops would combine his professional expertise with the life lessons he'd learned along the way. They would focus not just on technical skills, but also on resilience, creativity, and personal growth. Ethan smiled as he typed the final line of the proposal. The journey to the top begins with a single step, but the climb is where you find yourself. The climb continues. Ethan sent off the proposal with a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it with the same determination that had carried him this far. As he walked out of his apartment and into the bustling city streets, he felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the challenges, the failures, the victories, and the people who had shaped his journey. Because no matter how high he climbed, Ethan knew one thing for certain. The best views weren't just at the summit, they were in every step along the way. The legacy of the climb. Months later, Ethan stood in front of a packed auditorium. The Chasing Heights. Building Your Path to Success workshop had become a reality. And this was the first session. Bright-eyed students, young professionals, and even seasoned architects filled the room, each carrying their own dreams, doubts, and aspirations. Ethan adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. He wasn't nervous. If anything, he felt deeply connected to every person in the room. He saw himself in their curious eyes and hopeful expressions. Good evening, everyone, he began, his voice calm but resolute. Before I dive into today's session, I want to share a story about fear, failure, and finding purpose. Opening up, Ethan spoke about the first time he felt completely out of his depth. The time he'd nearly quit after his project's delay. He described the sleepless nights, the fear of judgment, and the crushing weight of self-doubt. But here's the truth, he said, scanning the audience. Fear doesn't go away. Even now, when I take on a new challenge, I feel it creeping in. The difference is, I've learned to walk through it, to carry it with me instead of letting it control me. The room was silent, hanging on his every word. Ethan smiled. Your mind will play tricks on you. It'll tell you you're not good enough, that you're not ready, that the climb is too steep. But let me tell you something I've learned after years of chasing heights. Your mind is your greatest obstacle and your greatest ally. You just have to decide which voice to listen to. The turning point. As the workshop continued, Ethan shared practical tools for overcoming self-doubt and building resilience. He encouraged the participants to redefine failure, not as an endpoint, but as a stepping stone. Every stumble, every rejection, every so-called failure, it's all a part of the climb, he said. And the climb isn't just about reaching the summit. It's about who you become along the way. He invited the participants to write down their biggest fear or self-limiting belief on a piece of paper. Then, one by one, they walked up to a large trash bin in the middle of the stage and tossed their papers inside. You don't have to carry these with you anymore, Ethan told them. The climb is hard enough without unnecessary weight. A moment of connection. At the end of the session, a young woman approached Ethan. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed him a small notebook. This is my sketchbook, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been too scared to show it to anyone. But after hearing you speak, I think I'm ready. Ethan flipped through the pages, filled with intricate designs and bold ideas. He looked up at her, his smile warm and genuine. These are incredible, he said. You have a gift. Don't ever hide it again. The young woman's eyes filled with tears as she thanked him. A ripple effect. As the weeks went on, Ethan's workshops gained momentum. Word spread, and more people signed up, eager to learn not just about architecture, but about life, resilience, and self-belief. Ethan received countless emails and letters from participants who had taken his lessons to heart. Some had landed their dream jobs. Others had started their own businesses. And many simply felt more confident in their own skin. One email, in particular, stood out. It was from the young man Ethan had spoken to in the cafe months earlier. Ethan, the email began, I just wanted to thank you. That day in the cafe changed my life. I've started my own journey now, one step at a time. And I know I'll stumble along the way. But I also know I'll keep climbing. The endless climb. Ethan read the email with a deep sense of fulfillment. He had set out to inspire others. But in doing so, he had found new inspiration for himself. One evening, as he stood on the balcony of his apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below, Ethan reflected on his journey. The climb was never truly over. He realized there would always be new challenges, new fears, and new heights to reach. But that was the beauty of it. The journey was the reward. He whispered to himself, Here's to the next step. And with that, Ethan turned away from the view, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Moral of the story: chasing heights. Your mind is your greatest tool. Success begins with how you think. By overcoming fear, self-doubt, and limiting beliefs, you unlock the potential within yourself. Growth happens in the climb. The journey toward your goals teaches you resilience, humility, and self-awareness. Success isn't just about reaching the top. It's about who you become along the way. Letting go is sometimes necessary. Releasing what no longer serves you, whether it's fear, unrealistic expectations, or projects misaligned with your values, makes room for growth and clarity. Redefine success. True success isn't measured by accolades or wealth, but by the positive impact you leave on others and the fulfillment you find in your journey. Empower others as you rise. Sharing your lessons and uplifting others creates a ripple effect. By helping others climb their heights, you leave behind a legacy of inspiration and hope. Never stop climbing. Life's challenges and opportunities are ongoing. Embrace each step, knowing that the climb itself is where life's most meaningful moments occur. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. If you like the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Take care, and see you next time.